think the whole community has had time to stew in the whole Nadu situation, and we've aired our grievances with commander players fighting constructed players or constructed players fighting commander players, and they're just defending their lives. Like, it's all come to that kind of status situation. I think we've all settled down, but yesterday we had a bit of a uptick in the situation with Mark Rosewater chiming in his take on the whole Nadu ban situation. It is obviously, rightfully so, caused an uproar in Wizards of the Coast situation and their processes leading to design. And I think there's been a lot of discussion that hasn't really been fruitful. I will firstly say I don't genuinely believe the whole argument that commander players don't want design like this, right? Because Nadu was designed first and foremost with commander in mind. The change was made because of concerns by commander players, and the vocal minority, which content creators like us and people that are watching this channel, that's the vocal minority. Those are the people that absorb content, make content, go on Twitter and scream at the moon. You're not the vast majority of commander players. To my knowledge, I would say that the vast majority of commander players, the casual audience, speak with their wallets and to a certain degree do want designs like this because of speaking with their wallets and the cards they want to play lead to designs like this. So I don't completely buy the whole argument that a lot of creators are putting out that commander players don't want commander focused design. I think a lot of players do. They just don't really understand it, right? Like they're just kind of honing in on the situation. I will say though that I'm not completely blaming commander players. At the end of the day, my stance is that we should be blaming the processes set in place that don't allow Wizards of the Coast to properly test. Because in my opinion, what the testing process should be is that we have a card. We then have a testing phase that tests the problems of this card. And then if they're bad, lead to testing of a new design, and that design should then go to Form B. You have Form A, you test, you change, you then go to Form B. It shouldn't be Form A, test, oh, it's a problem, make Form B, test Form B. No. The testing should include in the middle the design and testing of Form B to lead to B as a final iteration. That is what it should be. Because ultimately then in the loop, you come up in a situation where you test for A, you test for, you come up with A, you test for A is a problem, you make B. At some point in that loop, there has to be a final creation. There is a point where you cannot test anymore. As part of the design process, you make a final card and you ship that out, which is why that form of testing is a problem. Right? And we should be changing this as product designers, as product managers, as project managers in this situation for a design, a set, a overall mechanic. Like all these things should be managed. And I think with what Mark Rosewater has put out there has caused another round of discussion on the Nadu situation. And that's kind of what I wanted to go over today. I wanted to go over Mark Rosewater's Blogatog, his response and further tweets kind of around that, really cementing the situation and how we should be looking at design moving forward and whether or not Nadu truly was a problem because of commander players, problem because of design. Hoping we can kind of finally set that in stone, leave this behind, and just get to some gameplay the rest of the time and talk about other things. Well, let's hop right into it with a tweet from Forsythe. This tweet was actually before Mark posted anything. Buttoning up my part of the Nadu conversation, this is not an issue. This is not what the goals of the card or the change were. This stuff happens all the time. We consider as many audiences as possible with every product to varying degrees. But you could still consider modern audiences 1%, commander audiences 99%, and still say, oh, we consider every audience. I don't think, yeah, but I promise MH3 was plenty of content for modern. I mean, sure, I agree. I 100% agree. As a modern player, Modern Horizons 3 has had plenty of content, good content, bad content, whatever it is, content for modern. I will say that is true. The issue was timing and the degree of the change of the card, regardless of intent or audience. That was wrong, bad. We've internalized that and are not pleased that we ended up here, as the article made clear. Sure, I appreciate that, Aaron, and I agree. I think the acknowledgement and the transparency is very important here, and I appreciate that. A lot of times Wizards of the Coast does not do that. In the rare instances, it's very easy for us to jump on that. I will definitely agree that I was part of that kind of yelling squad here, but I'm kind of coming on to this with an open mind and hoping to, again, I don't want to be out here screaming and yelling. I think there's been a lot of good discourse, a lot of good discussion around this, and ways to look forward into future designs and what it means for Modern Horizons 4 when that inevitably kind of gets announced there. So here, Mark Rosewater says he posted some thoughts on this week's discussion around Nadu. Now, the Blogatog is a little long. It's not like kind of his regular answers. We are going to go through it. So kind of strap in here. So the Nadu situation. This has become a big topic in the community this week as I wanted to add my thoughts to the discussion. My focus isn't on the banning, but on the behind the scenes processes that led to it. I'm head designer, so I wanted to focus on the design elements of the situation. When we make Magic, there are a few times we do try to make it the best we can. First, we design it in what we call an iterative loop. That is, we make something, we play test it, we get feedback, we make changes on the feedback, and begin the next iterative loop. We try to get as many iterative loops in as possible, aka no more changes. No matter what though, at some point, there's a last day to make changes. Moving that line earlier doesn't make any doesn't change anything, sorry, other than giving us less iterative loops to improve on. Also, we make lots and lots of last minute changes. I don't like that. The vast majority of them make the game better. I understand there's more focus on the times we make a mistake, but it represents a truly small percentage of the changes. Okay, so he does kind of address this in a tweet that we're going to talk about in a second, but I think this generally falls, and so I like this because it is kind of telling on the community at large, and I appreciate this because as a designer, it isn't about you just completely taking blame. There should be pushback on the community. I'm happy he's doing this because the vast majority of times, the game is being made better. We just don't see those. We see the problematic changes. We see the broken things. We don't see the times when a broken design did exist and they fix it. We only see the negative, which is a situation I'm actually going to talk about later on, a psychological situation around how you tend to see or make reviews on negative experiences, especially when you go to like something like a restaurant. You won't see a lot of positive experiences. That is more so something that you see in recent times with a culture and everything. But I like this. It's important to push back on the community because that whole idea, and I truly believe this, the whole idea of the customer is always right is like probably one of the worst degenerate thoughts like you can have out there. There are so many situations where people will take advantage of you. The customer is not always right. You should listen to the customer, but a lot of times, you know, a lot of the community is just like, oh, we don't need a commander rules community. We should be banning everything. Like people are objectively wrong and they don't know what they're talking about. And then sometimes I don't as well. I'll take that as well. It's important for you as a designer, as a creator of a product to push back on your user base because sometimes they don't know what the hell they're talking about. That's the truth. That's real life advice. If you make something for someone, you create something, a lot of times people don't know what they want from it and they will like for no reason critique it when they don't really have a basis to stand on. I do that sometimes as well. It's just like not a thing that makes any sense in a large amount. You shouldn't necessarily take all of it to heart. You know, internalize some of it, really be able to critically think about some of it as a creator, but especially someone like Mark, probably very good at this. Also, whenever we design a card, we ask ourselves, who is this card for? If we're trying to make we're trying to make gameplay the best it possibly can be, it helps to understand who will use the card, where they'll use it, and what they'll do with it. Obviously, a game as modular as Magic, the players can often zig when we expect them to zag, but in general, the process leads to the best design. We have two play design teams, one focused on competitive play and one focused on casual play. The competitive play design teams determine which cards they think have a shot at competitive play. Remember, we're making predictions as to where we think the environment might go. We don't definitively know. We need to make an environment complex enough as to entertain tens of millions of players. Completely fair. The play design team then looks as the cards that they don't play as a competitive role, but see what they can do in casual play. With that said, let me respond to a few popular lines this week. Stop designing for Commander. I love this. I'm happy they're addressing like kind of regular statements here. The nature of competitive formats is that only so many cards can be relevant. Correct. And this is true for everything. There's so many cards that people just, oh, draft chaff. This is draft chaff, bulk rares, all this stuff. Like there's cards that are designed specifically for limited. There are cards designed maliciously to take away expensive slots of certain cards. Sure. But there's also a ton of cards that come out in every set that don't see any competitive play whatsoever. It's not just making every card competitively viable. That's not possible at all. That is not possible. So evidently, Commander originally being designed as a format to play or draft chaff, to play the cards that you couldn't play in standard, when Commander was what a lot of people would consider in its heyday. That is what you would use these cards for. And so a lot of people would think like, oh, these are cards designed now for casual. People would be like, oh, those casual cards, those draft chaff, like designed for Commander, because they don't see Commander play. They see casual play, and now that kind of line is blurring. So it's kind of like it's been there all along. As you start making more competitive relevant cards, they displace the weakest of the existing relevant cards. That's how trading card games work. That means not every card in a set, or just even all the rares and mythics, as the commons and uncommons have a big role in making the limited environment, has a competitive role. As such, we examine how they will play in more casual settings. There's no reason not to do that. Correct. I agree. 100%. You should not be trying to make all 200 plus cards in a set competitively viable. There should be casual design cards. There should be limited design cards. There should be cards from Pioneer, cards from Modern. Like you should. This is good card design. I agree. Saying like stop designing for Commander isn't necessarily a constructive thing to say. There should be a caveat to it. And I think like there should be design around it, but there should also be barriers put in place. There should be, there should be some stopping of Commander design if that Commander's design crosses into constructed play. Although there are very good examples of Commander specific design that have good implementations in constructed play. That is objectively true. But there are some ones that specifically probably should stay out of that as well. See things like the initiative really break things, but that's mostly in older formats. And when you think of casual settings, you are remiss if you don't consider Commander. It's the 800-pound gorilla tabletop play, aka the most played heavily dominant format. Yes, us considering the casual ramifications of a card we didn't feel as competitively viable is not what broke the card. Us missing the interaction with the component of the game we consider broken and have stopped doing so, and have stopped doing zero cost activations, but still lives on the older formats in the cause. So again, like what they missed is that they don't really make zero cost activations anymore. It's very rare, and so they missed that because that is not a thing that they necessarily designed for actively. Though I will say this is something, again, if done properly, should have been caught by the consultants. A lot of people, a lot of big creators, a lot of pro players have talked about how they've done consulting on multiple sets like this. But like they've talked about famously how the One Ring was a completely different artifact, a completely different card when they did consulting on it. But by the time it got to its final iteration through iterative loops, it wasn't like tested by those competitive players. So it's very interesting to see where in this design process these people actually come in and have design changes. Stop making late changes. Okay, whenever you see an airplane on the news, something bad has happened. It crashed, or it caught fire, or had an emergency landing, or a door fell off. Why do we still make planes? Honestly, facts. Like, actually, like, I'm happy, and again, I'm with Mark on this one. You should be pushing back on your community because some people have some crap takes. Really crap takes. Like that whole situation with like the judge and like the secret layer and like the ruling, like, yeah, there are problems in there, but like we should not be blaming the majority of the judge community. The judge program did not fail in that situation. Okay, the people failed in that situation, not necessarily the judge program as a failure. People made bad decisions. The judge program wasn't necessarily at fault, which is the coast, if anything, was at fault for not managing the judge program. And that's a whole different discussion based on like what's going on with like dealings and contracts and stuff with the judge community right now and how that's like kind of fell apart over the past couple of days. But it's like this is actually facts. Like the examples like this are very important for you as the average angry user to take into account. As someone who works with like clients and stuff, like customers and people outside of this, people suck. They don't understand what you want them to do. Like, and this is why a lot of people don't want to become nurses, doctors, or like teachers anymore. Like you're just like a glorified customer service representative and you don't get paid enough. Like truly. Because planes are pretty useful, and what's being highlighted is the worst element. The focus can lead to people to make false assumptions. Magic would not be better if we stopped making last changes. Sure. Yes, because again, I believe Mark Rosewater talks about in a later tweet that we don't get to see a lot of the changes that they make last minute that lead to good changes. We don't. A lot more broken things wouldn't be playable. Our processes of fixing things up to the last minute does a lot and lots of good. Maybe it doesn't get the focus of the screw ups, but it leads to better design. I like to believe this is true. Everything needs to be play tested. My and my team's job is to take a blank piece of paper and make something that doesn't exist. That's not an easy thing to do. I believe play design's job is even harder, and that they're trying to make balanced environment with thousands of moving pieces a year in the future. So this is kind of addressing that whole situation where a lot of people are like, yo, Mark Rosewater needs to be fired. Mark needs to be fired. Like, like, yo, y'all need to grow the hell up. Y'all playing a children's card game and telling people to lose their lives over it. People will actually like go on the internet and be like, you need to kill yourself. This is like that toxic crap that you see in like I'm just saying this as someone who plays like Overwatch and kind of engages with that community. Y'all know Samito in the Overwatch community? Like one of these like yo, I used to be a Samito follower until he just became like the heel of the Overwatch community. All he does is like yell, scream at the devs, and call it like passion. Yeah, I get angry, but I do want to backtrack, and a lot of that after once I've calmed down. Like, I'm not calling for people to like quit, lose their jobs, like all this stuff. People make mistakes, and we don't see the times when their iterative process has changed things for the better. Yes, we can be critiques, but we need to understand that a lot of times, like, there's a lot of good people behind this that have made good changes. And just like the plain example, we don't see the bad ones. And I don't want to sit here and become like the Samito of the Magic the Gathering community. I don't think no one really does. There are people in the Magic the Gathering YouTube space that have become the Samito. All they do is scream at the moon and complain and all that stuff. That's not me. I stand by Mark in a lot of these statements. I stand by the judge community in a lot of the situations that we've come to. We need to look at deeper situations and deeper parts of the process that are broken, that we can change on, that they're looking at changing on, and that's what we should be providing critique on. Also, if Samito watches this, that guy's turned into a prick. That guy's like actually turned into a prick. Like, I hope that guy never gets on like the SVB like podcast again. All that guy does is like yell and scream. It's like one of the worst members of the Overwatch community, honestly. There simply isn't time in the day to test everything, so the play design team tests what they think has the highest chance of mattering. They take calculated games based on years of experience and test the things most likely to cause problems. Will things slip through? There's no way they can't. The system is too complex not to miss things. That doesn't mean we don't continually improve our processes to lower chances of mistakes, but nothing we're going to do can completely eliminate them. Fair enough. There always will be mistakes. Nothing is 100% perfect. If you want something or believe something is 100% perfect, you are wrong. You are wrong. Designing Magic is difficult. Next year is my 30th year working on the game. Yo, shout out to that. And I think we have the most talented team we've ever had. Plus, just as we iterate on the designs in a set, we iterate on design processes and making Magic. How we make Magic today is light years different, and I believe better, and how we made Magic when I started. If I'd seen further, it's because I stand on the shoulders of giants. One final thing. I always push for transparency in Magic design. No one on the planet has spoken about it more than me. I truly believe Magic is better as a game because its players have the insight to understand what we, the people making it, are doing. We do ask for one thing in exchange. People treat the designers who take the time to share with you the behind the scenes workings of Magic design with kindness. We are all human beings. A feeling is nothing more than feedback that can be delivered with common courtesy. I agree. And that is where I will blame myself. That yes, in my anger, was yelling at people, but I hope I got across that the process is broken. I do not want Mark to take flack, Michael to take flack. A lot of times people are stuck in the corporate processes and the things that make Hasbro money. That is what you have to make design changes for. People need to like keep their jobs in a world of layoffs and AI taking over everything. Like, people just want to live. They just want to come home, enjoy their lives, and just play a game that maybe they're designing, or just enjoy the few fleeting moments that we have. And it's important to understand that that is what we're trying to do. We are trying to play a luxury hobby. We are taking time out of our lives, and yes, we want it to be good, which is why critiquing is impossible. Critiquing is promoted. It should be possible, I should say. But we can also deliver it a bit more constructively than I think a lot of us do on average. And I think, like, yeah, you can get angry every so often, just like how people make mistakes here in design, but it's very important to do so with like good intention. There's better ways to critique everything. I agree with a lot of what Mark is saying here. Patrick Sullivan here says that, of course, you should design cards for Commander. For each opponent, or if you have 30 or more life, is great. Right, for each opponent. As someone who plays Mill, I specifically benefit from stuff like this on Fractured Sanity, Ruin Crab, Tasha's Idiot's Laughter, stuff like that. Great. As I mentioned, there are great examples of Commander-specific design that have led to great constructed moments. What we ask for is power level play pattern feedback on the format where you can play Soul Ring and the whole thing is regulated by localized rule 0 to be ignorable. The whole thing is being written like Michael made a change late and not Michael left the meeting with Commander people and felt compelled to make a late redesign. The latter is the root issue. No one at WotC acknowledges this. Okay, so again, I will say this with a caveat. I think like what Mark is trying to say is like a mistake was made. They were transparent about it. And like maybe like some parts of it, like, yeah, you can pick apart, but like, I think some of this is true and some of this is a little unfair, as I was mentioning. Yeah, we shouldn't be like, it's part of the process, right? Like, yeah, commander players, like, they had like a concern around design, and that's completely fair. They are allowed to put in their input, but like also as part of the process, like the iterative loop should be different. Like the product design process should be different. And I imagine for like years and years, this has been iterated on, right? Like there have been multiple changes. This is like a very basic structure of any organization. Creating any type of value as an organization, whether you're a bakery or a multi-million-dollar corporation like Amazon, you are creating a product or a service that you give to customers, and you have an iterative loop. You have a product management cycle. You have a project design process that you put into place, and all of it has to change over time with how the economy changes, with how people change, with how we consume that content. All of that is important, whether it be, you know, now consumers like sprinkles on their cupcakes and now they don't. You change your iterative process to adapt to what people want. And I think maybe the Commander adaptation hasn't fully seen the final stages of what it should be to really create that harmony between constructed and Commander play. I think Marl's point about us only seeing last minute changes when they go wrong is super fair. I imagine this happens a lot and we just never get to see what goes wrong. Not sure I agree with the stop designing for Commander part of it in full. Of course, Wizards should consider Commander when they're designing cards. I think that people have an issue is that when cards are pushed or warped specifically to be good in Commander. I also agree with the idea that not everything needs to be play tested. I'll sometimes build a deck and record without testing first, but I'm not sure testing was a problem here. Nadu's tech should have been obviously problematic to a designer without ever testing. And I think like I kind of agree with this. Like they've had this whole design thing with like, oh, only once per turn. Like, yeah, you can do this easy loop and make treasure, but like that only happens once a turn. And like, I think there were some very obvious things here. Like, I think there were some obvious takes here. And like, I think like maybe the consultants involved in designing Nadu were brought in maybe too early in the process, if at all. And like this final design loop, like if the card is for constructed, why do the Commander players get the most recent say? Like, why couldn't Commander players get an initial say, and then the constructed consultants, the constructed designers get like a final say? Like, why? If this was for the Commander product, this makes sense. But if Nadu was supposed to be modern, legal, and constructed playable, why were the constructed players, based on like what we're reading, what I'm seeing, why were the constructed players like why was their experience thought of too early in the process? Why couldn't they have been the last ones to make that change? Because yeah, it said like it seemed like it was fine, and then the Commander players had an issue. Why couldn't we have just done that earlier in the process? I don't know. Like like that has to be a thing with like all legendaries, right? Like all legendary creatures have to be at a baseline like designed in a certain way with Commander in mind, because they could be a Commander, and like that's it. Like they're just gonna on average see more play in that format because they are a legendary creature, just like Nadu is. Why don't constructed players, like if it's in a constructed set, why don't they get the final say on it? I don't know. Touching on this first issue about how kind of seeing last minute designs, what we as a consumer see only when it's super wrong. I found this quick article on Rise. I don't necessarily know like the complete legitimacy behind it, but this is a common thing that a lot of people talk about, such as with the 2013 study from Zendesk found that people are more likely to talk about negative experiences rather than positive ones. From their research, they say 95% of users were more likely to share bad experiences, while 87% would share good ones. 54% shared their bad experiences with more than 5 people, whereas 33% shared their good experiences with more than 5 people. So they may share with a few, but when they're bad, it's like when I'm screaming at the internet, I'm like, oh, they're not too bad, like, blah, 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 but I may not be taking a lot of time to do the positive ones. And I can posit like a lot of people watching this video, like this video will probably turn off a lot of people, and its average view rate will probably statistically be worse because people don't want to watch good videos. I probably have to word this like the problem with Nadu, or Mark Rosewater weighs in, more issues with Nadu. Like I have to spin the title and the thumbnail of this video negatively to get clicks so that people can watch me actually have a good response to the video. That is just a content metagame. You have to clickbait, you have to get people in, and hopefully your message comes across. I appreciate everyone that's this far in the video. You're probably one of those people that probably would share your good experience with more than 5 people. And then 45% shared their bad experiences, while 30% shared their good experiences on social media. Again, how the vocal minority tends to be a negative cesspool. You see a lot more negativity on Reddit, on Twitter, all that stuff. That is the type of engagement bait that people want to get involved with. And I think that's very true, especially here in this design process where we aren't necessarily highlighting a lot of the good designs because we may not see or talk about from the designer perspective, cards that have historically had bad designs but then went good. They're not necessarily talking about that. They're talking about like the uproar and addressing that. And there have been like plenty of examples of cards throughout Magic's history that have historically have had last minute changes that have led to bad situations. Umezawa's Jite, still on the modern ban list. I believe it can be unbanned, but may not lead to good play patterns. Umezawa's Jite was famously a card that saw a last minute design change and became broken. Oko Thief of Crowns was another one that saw a last minute design change and then ultimately became the most busted planeswalker in Magic's history. Like there are plenty of designs of that, but there are also other designs. I believe there's like this white like life gain card at like 8 mana or something like that. Like there are other cards that have good design last minute changes, but ultimately just became like crappy cards. And so all of this exists throughout Magic's history. And then I think statistically speaking, I agree with the fact that, yeah, there have been more changes towards good design than bad ones, because we are more likely to talk about the bad ones, but it may not mean necessarily that these stats don't lead to that this design isn't talking about whether or not there were more bad designs or bad experiences. It's just that more people will talk about the bad experiences. So it makes it feel like that there are more bad experiences in general. So Mark then here talks about specifically in terms of numbers. A lot of people have asked, so here's the stat in the last week sets on average, we make about 30 to 50 mechanical changes. Last minute changes cause a card that needs to get banned once every 3 to 4 years. Perfect. And I'm glad he kind of laid it out for people. Like all this is so important. Who's unbanned Fatal Summon? Get out of here. Who is this? Pioneer players, get out of here. I don't know. Black Myth, Wukong, stop designing cards. Like again, people just senselessly being on Twitter saying nonsense. Like, I love this tweet. I think it's very important to point out something like this. A stat like this is something that we can always refer to. It's good that we got it out on the internet here. One of the final things I want to talk about here is kind of Pleasant Kenobi's tweet here. Well, whilst this is amazing context, it does muddy one of the key takeaways. The cause wasn't exclusively last minute changes, it was pressure to change something due to commander gameplay in a non-commander set. It was the input from a commander focus that had such weight. To clarify, I would rather mistakes were made than safe designs create a boring environment. I say this explicitly in today's video, so yeah, whenever you kind of posted it 6 hours ago. Designing for all formats at once is so hard, but that really doesn't change the criticism that the focus is often too heavily on commander. Yes, I think like that is where like, okay, who is this? This guy at the bottom's like, this card wasn't designed for commander. It changed after a commander focus group. Playtesting the decision shows how much influence this focus group it has. Perhaps I read what I said before. Perhaps read what I said before being like, well, actually, yeah, you know, this is the well, actually people on Twitter. Like the card had a big influence by commander design. It wasn't commander focused, but it is safe to say as a legendary creature in a set with commander product and with commander in mind, there was a big focus on designing this card around commander. That is objectively true. And there was a big piece of weight put on commander feedback. And I would say maybe in this iterative process, that commander focus should have been done earlier in the iterative loop, and maybe later the final say should have been by the constructed folks. But of course, I'm not here to talk to Wizards of the Coast about, you know, changing their iterative loop specifically to something I believe versus what they believe. What they believe and what they've been doing has generally been working. It just kind of sucks when things like this really fall through the cracks. And I get it. Like ultimately, statistically speaking, this process has led to a lot more good change versus bad. A lot of people might say, oh, this is coming straight from WotC itself. How can you believe it? It's coming from the horse's mouth. Like, this is the information we have. Unless one of y'all want to break into Wizards of the Coast headquarters, get inside, take video and all this stuff, like really break open the insides of Wizards of the Coast. If none of y'all want to do that, this is the information we got to take to heart. This is the kind of big brother take that we got to use as our informed decision as to whether or not we want to believe Mark, Michael, and the design process. I think there are flaws in the system, but I do also believe Mark when he says that there are a lot more good changes than bad in the process to design Nadu.